Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where in the world you are today. And welcome to this webinar on social protection and inclusive care and support systems strengthening. To introduce myself quickly, my name is Rachel Mason. I'm the Gender and Social Protection Lead at the FCDO in the UK. And I'm really pleased to be able to open this webinar today. So this is the second in a series of webinars in the series entitled Towards Inclusive Social Protection Systems, Participation and Inclusion of Persons with Disabilities. Now, this series was created following the adoption of the joint statement Towards Inclusive Social Protection Systems Supporting the Full and Effective Participation of Persons with Disabilities, which was adopted in 2019. After it was adopted, a broad coalition of partners, development partners, experts and organisations of persons with disabilities took part in a process to develop some technical resources, including a guidance note. This process was facilitated by UNICEF, ILO and IDA with the support of UNPRPD, Government of Norway and the European Commission. So this webinar series, which is implemented jointly with these partners and kindly supported in addition by DFAT of Australia, will discuss some of the core modules of this guidance note. And we're holding this webinar as part of this series to emphasise that discussions about care and support really must include questions of disability, and to make it abundantly clear that it's impossible to discuss care and support without considering these questions. Today, specifically, we'll be talking about disability inclusive, gender responsive care and support systems. It's crucial that we take this broader perspective to make sure that in trying to find solutions for one group, either persons living with disabilities or women and girls, that we don't inadvertently create problems for the other. So if we seek to reduce the disproportionate share of unpaid care work that women shoulder, that we don't, in so doing, limit or hinder or worsen the quality of care and support that persons with disability can access. Now, some quick housekeeping before we start. So this session is being recorded. There are live captions available. Do click the button at the bottom of your screen. There is sign language interpretation, and there will also be English, Spanish simultaneous interpretation. So please do click any of those buttons and type in the chat if you're struggling with anything there. So to run through quickly what you can expect today. So our speakers will be addressing this question of gender responsive, disability inclusive care and support systems and social protection from various different angles. So first of all, we'll hear what care and support is and why it matters across the life course. Then we'll talk about why we're discussing care and support and social protection systems together and the systems approach to this. We'll then have our panel where we'll hear about what this looks like in different contexts, and particularly in lower middle income countries. We'll then have time for Q&A. So I'll encourage you, as the session is going, to use the Q&A box, which you'll see at the bottom of your screen, to ask questions, which we'll then collect and answer in those last 20 minutes. Given that there will be a bit of a gap between you asking the question and the question being answered, do think about contextualising it. What is it in relation to? What do you want to know? And if there is somebody specifically who would like to answer the question, then please do note that in the chat, in the Q&A box. You can use the chat to chat as you go along. So I'll introduce our speakers for today, and then we'll hand over to the first section. So you know me, I'm Rachel Mason, and then you will be hearing from Alex Scott, who is the Social Protection and Disability Lead at UNICEF. He'll be moderating the panel. Lauren Whitehead, the Social Protection and Gender Lead at UNICEF, will run through the first section. Alexandra Barrantes, Senior Social Protection Specialist at STAR, will talk through the systems approach. Then our panel is Afra Al-Ahmadi, Senior Social Protection Specialist from the World Bank, Florencia Corral, the Director of the National Integrated Care System in Uruguay, Armanui Havakimian, Senior Policy and Social Protection Specialist in UNICEF Armenia, Michael Lieuw-Kie-Song, Senior Employment Specialist at the ILO, and Vincent Gahamani, Social Policy and Social Protection Specialist at UNICEF Rwanda. I'll hand over now to Lauren Whitehead to take us through the first section of the webinar. Thanks, Lauren.
Wonderful, and thank you so much, colleagues, and we will make sure that you all have access to these slides once the session is complete. So I do hope that you're able to hear me okay, and I will go ahead and start us off with the state of play. So if we're able to go to the next slide, that would be terrific. Wonderful. So we have a Mentimeter question that we'd like to pose to all of you at the outset of the session. So if you can go to Mentimeter, we would be very happy to hear, what do you think care and support refers to? And perhaps we'll come back to this later on in the webinar as we go through, but we'd love to hear from everyone who is here today. I see we have over 100 participants, almost 120 participants gathered, so I'm sure there's a diversity of thoughts and opinions on what does care and support refer to, especially depending upon what sectors you're all coming from. So you can go to mentimeter.com and enter the code 84814407, or you can also scan the code that's on your computer screen now, and we will drop that in the chat as well for colleagues to see. Next slide, please. So now we're going to address the state of play of care and support systems and what it means to think about care and support system strengthening for persons living with disabilities while managing and balancing some of the gender equality considerations. So as you're answering that question on Mentimeter, I will just say, when we're referring to care and support in this particular webinar, what we typically refer to is care for children and the family. So for example, ensuring daily needs are met for individuals, performing tasks on behalf of individuals, and specifically those person-to-person tasks that might be engaged, for example, with personal care, feeding, for example, of a child, responsive care and stimulation, if you think about a nurturing care framework, childcare, and indirect tasks such as household chores and domestic work. When we speak of support specifically, for those who may be less familiar, support tends to refer to support for persons with disabilities and older persons. So providing tools and skills that people require to live independent lives with dignity and autonomy, supporting that person to perform those tasks themselves rather than doing such things for them, and person-to-person tasks, including human services through things like assistive technologies, personal assistance, and other forms of infrastructure, for example, point-to-point transport. The reason why we say this at the outset is because very often there is confusion as to where these two terms intersect and why they come together. But we do think it's very important to recognize that when we refer to support, we are supporting persons with disabilities and older persons, not caring for them in the sense that you do with a child, for example, which is why we distinguish between care and support, and we bring them together when we think about a systems approach. On the next slide, please. Why does it matter? Across the life course, we know that everyone needs care and support at some point of their lives. We know that whether you are a child who is newly in the early child development stage, or you are a person who has a disability, or you are a person entering a later stage of life as an older person, for example, at some point during the course of your life, you're going to require some form of care and support. Social protection, we believe, is very well placed at the center of care and support systems because it provides many of the underlying resources that households and individuals need to fulfill their care and support needs. Next slide, please. What do we mean when we're referring to care and support systems? So some of you may have participated in a recent global workshop that took place and was convened by FCDO, UNICEF, and STAR in London. This global workshop focused on care and support system strengthening, and particularly looked at what are the different components that constitute care and support systems. Care and support systems consist of direct support, which is some of what I was just describing in the previous slides. This is support that's directed to giving people directly the care and support that they require. So for example, human services, that can be access to personal assistance for persons with disabilities, that can be access to childcare, for example, for children. It also consists of financial support, which is that support given to reduce the financial burden of care and support for those requiring it and for their caregivers. So for example, through social protection, this might look like access to child benefits. It might look like access to disability allowances. It could even look like access to caregiver tax credits, for example. So very importantly, social protection we see very often provides access to some of these financial supports. It also refers to social norm support, which is that support used to shift social expectations based on someone's immutable characteristics, for example, of those households, individuals, and communities. So for example, providing paid parental leave in workplaces or for a national level policy that is provided to both parents in order to encourage that gender balance in caregiving, for example, or even providing something like mobile creches or access to childcare at public work sites, for example, again, for both parents. So that is to shift the norms around who is expected to be a caregiver by providing space and time for both parents, for example, to be caregivers. Legal and policy support, which are entitlements, protections, oversight, governance, service delivery regulations, and coordination. So the entire policy realm that governs care and support systems. So for example, giving people job protections if they have a disability or if they need maternity or a paternity period, having nationally entitled caregiver leave for those who may need to care for an aging parent, etc. So legal and policy of support refers to all of the legal and policy realm in that way. And then the last is actually indirect support. And this refers to looking at other sectors that may not directly contribute to a care and support system, but sectors without which we could not have robust care and support systems. So for example, having access to inclusive education, while that is the education sector and doesn't directly provide care and support, having inclusive education means that children with disabilities are able to participate actively in the education sector and to attend school, for example, or having public transport systems that are inclusive so that persons with disabilities can access work and places of employment, for example. So these are 5 of the key components that we look at, and again, that were also discussed and comprised during that global workshop around care and support system strengthening as underlying an effective care and support system. Many of which you will see on the next slide, please, are closely linked to social protection. I'm sorry, I will come back to that in a second, but on this slide, what we are discussing here is a little bit more on what I alluded to in the beginning, and what Rachel mentioned at the outset of the webinar, which is how do we increase access to high quality care and support while also reducing some of the gender inequalities that are driven, especially by unpaid care and support. So we recognize that in the current world and in the increasingly aging world, in fact, that we are heading towards, there is an increasing need for high quality care and support for children, for older persons, for persons with disability, for people in different stages of their lives. But at the same time, we see that disproportionately those caregiving responsibilities fall on women and girls, especially the unpaid care and household and domestic work. How do we create a better balance of this system? We believe that that's through innovation, especially through sectors like social protection, to help fill the gap for individuals and for households by taking some of that responsibility onto the state, onto government to actually provide some of those supporting infrastructures, policies, programs that would then enable households and individuals to have the caregiving and support that they need for themselves. If we are able to strengthen a care and support ecosystem in this way, we see that it would create a world where women and girls, for example, can fully participate in education and economic opportunities for them. They can access family-friendly policies and engage in the workplace as workers, but also as parents, for example. And they can receive care when they themselves are children, rather than just providing that care for others in many cases. Men and boys could also participate fully in caregiving and domestic responsibilities and be a part of their home lives in a way that currently the system is not well designed to enable. They also would be able to have access to family-friendly policies and perform those dual roles as workers and parents, or receiving care themselves as children and not being conscripted to provide that care within the household as significantly as they are now. Persons with disabilities would be able to access community-based support, so moving away from institutionalization towards a principle, an underlying principle of deinstitutionalization. They would have extra cost support, so support to provide for some of those extra financial costs of living with a disability. They'd have access to human assistance, transport and housing, etc. And then older persons would be able to live dignified, independent lives where they can age with functionality in their own communities amongst their own friends and family, and also while receiving critical old age pensions to supplement that lack of working during the later years of life. So in this way, we see these as being some of the key outcomes of a well-balanced care and support system. And now if we go to the next slide, I believe we will talk a little bit more about what does this look like through social protection. On the next slide, please. Thank you so much. So on this slide, what we see here are some of the many different sectors that contribute to care and support. So as I mentioned, you will see social protection, social policy sitting there in the center. However, we recognize that many other sectors also play a very critical role, and that a truly robust care and support system is not possible without leveraging multi-sectoral contributions. We all have to come together for these systems to truly work. So for example, you can have an anchoring in child benefits, national paid leave, child care subsidies, child tax credits, disability allowances, etc., through social protection. But you also will need access to childcare and early childhood education, for example, through early childhood development. You will need access to breastfeeding allowances and maternal nutrition through nutrition sectors. You'll need access to workplace family-friendly policies through, for example, engaging of the private sector and business. You'll need access to support specifically, for example, for adolescent mothers, considering that adolescent mothers are very often overlooked, adolescent parents in general, but adolescent mothers especially, who play multiple caregiving roles in their households for their own children, and therefore forgo their education and economic opportunities in many cases. You'll need access to personal assistance and assistive devices for persons with disabilities, access to the social service workforce, for example, through an area like child protection. So there are many sectors that contribute, even while having social protection potentially as a strong foundation and anchor for care and support systems, given the many pieces that social protection provides. If we go to the next slide, we'll see a little bit more of those systems, those components, please. Thank you. On this slide, what we see here is demonstrating a key reason and feature, a set of key reasons and features for why social protection is so critical for care and support systems to truly function. This is because if we refer back to that earlier slide, social protection systems provide many of those forms of support, whether financial support, whether direct support, whether social norms support, that need to comprise a care and support system. Some of which I've mentioned already, so I won't repeat, but you see, for example, access to childcare services, access to disability support and human services such as personal assistance, assistive technology, etc. You see access to paid parental leave for both parents, caregiver tax credits and incentives, childcare subsidies, even access to health insurance, specifically to be able to afford healthcare needs, which is critical, absolutely critical for persons with disabilities, for older persons, and for children and their families as well. You see access to social norm support, for example, to support children's rights, to reduce disability stigma, to help in changing gender norms, especially harmful gender norms. And then you also see that social protection plays a critical role in the legal and policy support sphere. For example, financing contributions to many of those other sectors that were mentioned on the previous slide, financing contributions to the health sector, financing contributions to education, to child protection, etc. Social protection is also where you see an undergirding of social benefits and social insurance, including Social Security. For example, thinking about access to pensions that we mentioned before, and many of these other financial supports that we discussed. Social protection can also be the home for access to family-friendly policies, which I'll come back to in a second, and access to different types of care facilities that households might need for those those individuals and those families. So in this way, we see that social protection provides many different key features, of those 5 components that are most critical for a truly robust care and support system. And this is why we see such a strong foundation in social protection specifically. And if we go to the next slide, please. And I will close by just sharing on 4 family-friendly policies that at UNICEF we often promote as it relates to supporting a robust care and support system. We believe that in having access to some of these family-friendly policies, households will better be able to provide for individuals in that household, whether they're children, persons with disabilities, or also even care for aging parents and aging relatives, for example. So having access to paid parental leave to care for young children, and I would add as well for caregiving responsibilities for others within a household is critical. Having access to affordable, accessible, and quality childcare for young children, having access to child benefits, and we would add as well disability allowances, for example, for a household to cover those extra costs, and of course support for breastfeeding, especially during those first 6 months of life. So in providing some of these family-friendly policies, we see this as being critical to care and support systems as it pertains to children especially. And I will stop there so that we can turn to our illustrious panel, who I think are going to talk us through many specific examples of what care and support looks like in different contexts. So if we can go to the next slide, I believe our next speaker is going to come to start talking a little bit more about the systems approach. So that should be Alex to moderate our fantastic panel of country examples. Thank you very much for listening to this on the overview of the state of play. We will also share some resources in the chat, and I believe have been sharing some so far as it relates to this topic, including an evidence note that was developed on care and support systems coming out of that global workshop and prior work between FCDO, UNICEF, and STAR. And then we will also share an outcomes report that came out of that global workshop as well. Thank you very much, and I will pass to Alex.
Thank you very much, Lauren. Before we move to the country example, it would be one of the things that we really wanted to do is basically try to look how basically social protection systems and care and support system articulate each other, and what are some of the type of examples that we've seen. And for that, I would like to invite Alexandra Barrantes, who has done extensive work with all of us on this, to give us this overview. Alexandra, the floor is yours. You are muted, Alexandra.
Oh, sorry. Can you see me and hear me now?
All good.
Good. Thank you so much. Very pleased to be here connected from Uganda, Kampala today. So thank you very much, Lauren, for that introduction. That provides a very good leeway into what we're going to be talking about. And if we can go to the next slide, please. So again, this work is linked to what Lauren mentioned, an evidence note and the workshop that took place in London. And the idea of bringing in this train of thought was on thinking about why it is a system. And Lauren has already introduced, I don't need to go into detail why we're taking the systems approach and why countries should be taking the systems approach. And I think it is also important to remind ourselves that the work was undertaken within the context of trying to find a set of either recommendations or a set of guidelines and a set of ideas of how this has worked, mostly in low and middle income countries, right? Because it's not the same, obviously, in each context. And that was something that we wanted to do since the onset. So in terms of the inclusive and comprehensive care and support systems, Lauren has already introduced it and defined what we talk about when we're talking about this, but it includes this idea of multi-sectoral policies, programs, and services. So it's not just one set of services, one policy, or one sector that should be and would be in charge of providing care and support from the public spectrum. And so the systems approach then allows us to think about how to better facilitate and uphold the dignity and rights of those that are on the one end providing and sort of the care and support services, but also those that are using the care and support services, which by the way, in some instances are also the same people, right? There's also women that are users of care and support. There's also persons with disabilities that are providing care and support to their children, to their elder relatives and such, and same with older persons. It's also so that we can think about how to deliver a fairer organization of that care and that support, and to make sure that it's seen that it's the state's responsibility to uphold these individuals' rights and intersectoral approaches across all actors involved. And when we're talking about care and support, we're also talking about the right to care and support. We're also talking about the right to education, to health, to social protection, and intertwined and interdependent social and economic rights. And also the systems approach provides us with a way of looking at the governance for institutional coordination and sort of the shift from a merely sort of based services logic based on services to one that looks at individuals' needs and rights throughout the life course, right? So it's a more complete and more systematic approach from the onset. And if we can go into the next slide. This then means, of course, that we have a range of actors that are involved in what we call care and support systems, right? We've set up the fact that it is the state's main responsibility to obviously provide and ensure and guarantee the right to care and support services coming as a public good, but then there's a wide range of actors that are involved, and I won't go into full length detail of that, but in the resources that are going to be shared with you today, you'll see a much lengthier sort of explanation of which actors these include. But it goes from informal workers and community-based organizations undertaking a lot of their care and support within communities. And again, this again goes back to low and middle income countries mainly. Also right organizations, constituents and experts in civil society in general who have had a role and have a role in sort of setting up the agendas, but also in pushing for the rights of children, for example, deinstitutionalization, rights of older persons and persons with disabilities, and also feminist movements, for example. We also have employers and businesses who also have responsibilities from a social perspective, social protection perspective, as well as labor employment laws. So that's something to consider. We have formal worker organizations, which in some instances have a great role, a potential in terms of bargaining. We also have technical advisory firms and researchers, international organizations, development and humanitarian partners that are providing some set of interventions or providing advice. There's also private service providers of, for example, childcare or older care. So that's also something to consider when we're thinking about that. And then also state actors, which is the wealth of different institutions, agencies, ministries in charge of those multi-sectoral policies and services and programs, as Lauren was also describing earlier. So if we go into the next slide. So one of the important things then is, if we're thinking about a systems approach, and if we're thinking about it from a human rights perspective and a life course perspective, as well as trying to make sure that all of these different aspects are covered, we need to start thinking, okay, where do we start, right? And that's the thing that in many low and middle income countries, it becomes a puzzle of where do we start in terms of where does it fit in? Where does care and support fit in? And I think Lauren has also already provided some of the examples of why social protection might be one of those entry points into the public sector in making sure that we incorporate some of those care and support considerations. So what you see here on the graph is the framework, the human rights and life course frameworks for the systems approach in terms of care and support. And what we did is looking at all of the different actors that you see at the very top, which was some of the actors that we described in the previous slide, and then thinking about it from a life course approach, right, in the context of upper middle income countries, lower middle income countries, and low income countries, we started trying to delve into some of the examples of how countries globally, particularly these income countries, have started setting up some of the first building blocks of what we could consider care and support systems, right? And what those entry points are. So what we've established is a set of like 5 different categories of how countries can start building some of these things. And these are not in a linear way. These are just organized in a way so that we can think about it from a more systematic perspective. So setting up care and support services, infrastructure, policies, and existing sectoral building blocks, right? Using those existing sectoral blocks, such as social protection, for example. Agenda setting and evidence building. There's also a huge amount of work that needs to be done in terms of, for example, changing the narratives around what care and support means, taking away words around the burden of unpaid care and what have you, which might be detrimental to the agency and to the dignity of some of those that are actually using the care, whether it's older persons, children, and persons with disabilities as well. And so that agenda setting in terms of how do we start talking at the national level or the local level, and there's examples in many countries of how this has been done. Also the governance and legal framework and how to build and prioritize which sector, which kind of services you're going to be working on first. Advocacy and ensuring compliance, right? And that also involves monitoring and making sure that, for example, decent work among care and support workers is also taken into consideration, etc. And also financing and resourcing, which obviously is important because that is what most of the public works and public finance policies, will be financed through. So that's something to take into consideration. So unfortunately, in most countries, in particular the context of the low and upper and middle income countries, you will see that care and support isn't necessarily an explicit agenda that has been yet developed within one sectoral policy, right, or within one sectoral set of policies. And so that is why, to a certain extent, we're thinking of social protection also being one of those entry points. And the first link, in addition to what Lauren has already mentioned, is that linking care and support systems with social protection is feasible as an entry point, as many of those required services are that Lauren already explained in terms of what care and support entails are already core components of what we call an inclusive life course social protection system, right? And you can go into like the overarching universal instruments around the right to social protection, but also into some of the ILO recommendations and conventions on minimum standards of what it entails, but also the social protection floors recommendation 202. And so there is a clear linkage there between the policies. And so we could see social protection as the linchpin for the care and support, right? Also the recommendation 202, the ILO recommendation 202, sort of specifically mentions the access to care by children, for example, maternity care, some of the maternity benefits, etc., as basic social security guarantees, right? So there is a strong linkage there in terms of the frameworks and some of the standards that exist on social protection globally. If we go to the next slide, please. And this is my last slide, because we're fortunate enough to have some very good examples from countries in which you will be able to see some of the work that has been done, right? So what I did here is incorporate some of these steps or some of these categories of how countries have been sort of setting up the care and support agendas in their countries, and provided some very specific examples, but I won't delve too much into these examples because, as I said, we have some very interesting country examples moving on. But just to let you know that, for example, in terms of setting up core care and support services and infrastructure and policies and using some of those existing social protection schemes or social protection systems in place, many countries have used that to do the wealth of different things. Like in terms of, for example, social protection in Argentina, there's a monotributo, which means that it's to incorporate and cover better sort of those independent workers so that they can get health and social security coverage. There's also, for example, examples of expansion of benefits of domestic workers in Chile, in South Africa, and Brazil and Bolivia. The first one very much linked to the COVID pandemic. We also have, and Lauren already mentioned that as well, financial incentives for carers, many examples also including in Asia and Africa. We have some personal assistance schemes such as in Thailand and Uruguay, and we'll hear much more about the Uruguay system in place. Mobile creche, which are also sort of childcare services that have been installed in countries such as India, the Maternity Act care in Kenya, informal workers, and negotiation organizations negotiating on adapting some of the early childhood sort of education principles to informal markets, and that's some examples in Africa, for example. And then we've obviously have disability allowances in countries such as Thailand, Fiji, Namibia, Tonga, Georgia, Kiribati as well. So those are some of the examples of how, from the social protection side of things, countries have done that, right? In terms of the agenda setting and evidence building, there's also movements in many countries. The movements around, for example, rights, women's rights and feminist and children rights have had an impact on the care and support systems, sort of creating that agenda or setting up the dialogues at the national level or local level. In the case of Colombia, for example, there's also local governments that have started those conversations to sort of spearhead the discussions at the national level. And then also examples of trade unions and groups of experts and care user journeys being used for different needs so that you can ascertain some of those needs and prioritization. In terms of governance legal frameworks, Latin America has quite a few examples of how that has been done. And we will hear specifically of the Uruguay case, which is sort of the example in the region of spearheading the system and sort of making it into an actual system, right? But there's also other countries such as Costa Rica, Colombia, Argentina that are talking about it, and that's also something to take into consideration. And then finally, on the advocacy and ensuring compliance, there's also different examples of campaigns and activism that can be seen in many countries, and you can see all of the details obviously in the literature and the resources that are being shared. But I wanted to focus here so that I can finalize as well, that unfortunately in most countries that have incorporated, or in some countries that have incorporated care and support sort of considerations into social protection, it's more done like as a marginal component. It's not seen yet as an important agenda that is set at the national level and that has the different considerations and rights and services and programs that are required. And so it is important that we link care and support as an entry point into social protection based on what we were saying beforehand, the linkages and the legal framework existing of how we could link it, and what Lauren was also mentioning in terms of, for example, family-friendly policies. But it is very important that this is not linked just with any social protection scheme. So depending on the level of development of social protection systems in different countries, and remember, we're talking particularly in low-income and middle-income countries, it is important to also link care and support systems to inclusive, to more sort of life course and rights-based approaches in terms of social protection schemes. And why is that?
Alex,
right.
I will ask you to conclude.
Finalize.
So, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, so it's just to remind ourselves that more inclusive social protection schemes are more transformative if they can also help redistribute unpaid care, support some of those, the social reproduction, and also ensure access to persons with disabilities to quality services, right? And unfortunately, some of those non-inclusive, if we link social protection merely to formal employment and also poverty targeting, this might not be able to sort of change the sort of the existing traditional ways in which care and support are organized from a gender perspective, but it's also important to look at the unintended consequences of some of these programs that, for example, public work programs or sometimes conditional cash transfer programs can just reinforce some of those traditional views on where and how care and support is undertaken at the community, at the household, and at the family level. So I'll leave it at that because I know we've got some very good country examples moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alex, for this extensive presentation. And now, basically, we would like to dive into different contexts to see how countries are actually trying to articulate social protection, care and support systems at different level of maturity of social protection systems, but also how we engage different actors and different type of programs to build this synergy between social protection and care and support system for them to be gender responsive, disability inclusive, and age sensitive. So I would like to start with, as Alexandra mentioned, the case of Uruguay, and we have the chance to have with us Dr. Florencia Krall from Uruguay. She's the director of the National Care Authority. And Uruguay is really seen as a standard setter in Latin America around care and support systems. So we are quite eager to hear about, to hear more about the case of Uruguay. Florencia, the floor is yours. And just for the colleagues, Florencia,
muchas gracias, Alexandre. Veo que me han anulado el video, pero no es desde mi cámara, no es desde mi PC, sino son ustedes que me han anulado. Y sé que no me están pudiendo ver en pantalla.
Colleagues, for those of you who do not speak Spanish, you can click on interpretation and choose the channel English. Florencia.
Muchísimas gracias. Bueno, quiero agradecer a todos y a todas por esta invitación. Para mí es un honor y sobre todo con la presentación destacada que han hecho respecto de Uruguay. Y quiero agradecer antes que nada a Lauren y a Alexander por el riquísimo introducción que han hecho respecto a precisamente todo lo que hacemos nosotros desde los sistemas de cuidado. Ustedes verán que Uruguay es un modelo en la región de sistema nacional integrado, ya que desde el 2015 contamos con una ley que ha creado este sistema en clave sistémica, precisamente como lo decía Lauren. La idea es, a través de esta ley, haber abarcado a más de 9 instituciones públicas estatales, entre ellas ministerios y organismos, que engloban todo lo que es la malla de la protección social en el Uruguay, algunos dispositivos que ya existían, otros dispositivos que se han creado a través de la ley, y hoy tengo el orgullo de liderar, ya que la ley ha puesto al Ministerio de Desarrollo Social el liderazgo de este sistema de cuidados. Si pasamos a la siguiente diapositiva, podremos ver cómo funciona esta gobernanza. Por favor, la siguiente diapositiva. Muchas gracias. Nos ilustra ahí el modelo de gobernanza que nuestra ley dispone a través de la Secretaría Nacional de Cuidados y Discapacidad, quien la integro, la Junta Nacional de Cuidados, que mostraré en la siguiente diapositiva todos los organismos estatales que establecen la gobernanza ejecutiva, y el Comité Consultivo de Cuidados, que integra todos los organismos de la sociedad civil, la academia, los colectivos feministas, como decía Lauren y Alexander, y que han sido parte de la creación de toda esta malla de protección social. En la siguiente diapositiva podemos ver allí la estructura de quiénes somos los organismos, Ministerio de Desarrollo Social, el liderazgo, y luego tenemos Economía y Finanzas, Educación y Cultura, Salud Pública, Trabajo, Banco de Previsión Social, que engloba todas las prestaciones que hacemos a través del dispositivo y que no las voy a repetir por los pocos minutos que tenemos, pero que Alexander y Loren precisamente destacaban con mucha claridad todas esas prestaciones que van desde la primera infancia hasta la vejez y que engloban los cuidados y que nosotros lo hacemos a través de nuestro Banco de Previsión Social. La Administración Nacional de Educación Pública, que engloba toda la educación primaria y secundaria, el Instituto Nacional del Niño y del Adolescente, que enfoca todo lo que es la política pública de primera infancia y todos los centros de cuidados de 0 a 4 años, el Congreso de Intendentes para trabajar la territorialidad a nivel nacional en todo el territorio nacional, y el Instituto Nacional de las Mujeres, que está permanentemente trabajando con nosotros en esa visión de género que llevamos adelante a través de la ley. Siguiente diapositiva, por favor. Nuestros objetivos, bueno, los grandes objetivos que han llevado adelante los sistemas de cuidados: reconocimiento, reducción de la carga de cuidados que Loren y Alexander hablaban, la redistribución de esa carga de cuidados para repartir, gracias a estos dispositivos de cuidados, la carga de cuidado, la profesionalización que hemos llevado adelante, ya que toda la formación de los distintos dispositivos y programas de cuidados la dirigimos desde aquí, la humanización que hemos llevado adelante poniendo a las personas en el centro de los cuidados y de nuestra política pública, y la expansión de todos los sistemas a través de lo que es una política de corresponsabilidad de género y social. En algunos dispositivos que no tendré tiempo de mostrar, pero que si ustedes miran nuestra web los encontrarán, hemos trabajado con la sociedad civil y con el mercado para poder involucrar en estos dispositivos, tanto en primera infancia como para poder llevar adelante junto con el Estado nuestra responsabilidad, pero contar con fondos de la sociedad y del mercado y de las empresas que también hacen parte de los cuidados. Y en los pocos minutos que me quedan, pediré que me pasen más rápido las diapositivas para llegar a la última diapositiva, en donde podemos ver que hoy Uruguay está trabajando a través de la reforma de la seguridad social en la sostenibilidad del sistema de cuidados. Precisamente este desafío que mis colegas hablaban, que es que en esta clave sistémica en la que todos somos parte de esta malla de protección social que va desde la primera infancia, la discapacidad, la inclusión educativa y la vejez, todo eso requiere el desafío de poder articular entre todos nosotros como responsables gubernamentales y estatales de todos estos dispositivos, salud pública, educación, todo lo que es el pago y la cobranza de todos estos dispositivos a todos nuestros usuarios que lo solicitan, la formación para poder brindar cuidados de calidad a través de buenos profesionales formados en cuidados, y que esta transformación del cuidado no remunerado hacia el cuidado remunerado vaya de la mano de una correcta profesionalización, y todo eso requiere un análisis muy profundo de sostenibilidad y de pensar de aquí a 30 y 50 años para adelante cómo los países de renta baja, como lo decían hoy en la presentación, tenemos la capacidad de dar sostenibilidad y poder llegar a un derecho universal, y que el cuidado de calidad sea un derecho universal para todas las personas que lo requieran dentro de la sociedad, tanto los más vulnerables como aquellos que los pueden pagar, pero que requieren que sean de calidad. Así que muchísimas gracias. Lamento que no han podido pasar un poco más las diapositivas mías. Veo que han quedado ahí. Si pueden pasarlas por lo menos para que se vean en pantalla. Me quedan unos 15 segundos nada más de mi presentación. He tratado de ser sumamente respetuosa del tiempo del resto de los colegas, y podrán ver que en las siguientes diapositivas queda ilustrado, y que ustedes van a recibir también los distintos dispositivos que implicó para Uruguay este desafío de hacer un sistema en clave sistémica, precisamente como lo dice la palabra. Muchísimas gracias a todos. Aquí están los dispositivos de infancia, ejemplos de dispositivos de infancia, ejemplos de dispositivo de dependencia. Alexander hablaba de cómo nosotros podemos pagar una prestación en la que invertimos más de 40 millones de dólares al año solamente en cuidados a domicilio, El programa Personal Assistance Service va dirigido a personas a domicilio, hacia aquellos usuarios que tienen dependencia severa y que requiere que se los cuide en su casa. Y tenemos más de 6.000 usuarios que reciben hoy esta prestación en su domicilio para aquellas personas que sean tanto en vejez como incluso niños o niñas en su acompañamiento al centro educativo con dependencia severa, puedan contar con un asistente personal. En la siguiente diapositiva tenemos esos ejemplos de los que yo hablaba, la corresponsabilidad de los cuidados, tanto en lo que es materia de género como en materia de corresponsabilidad social, integrando al mercado y a las empresas en la construcción de distintos centros para la primera infancia y haciendo así también lograr un cambio cultural en lo que tiene que ver con la distribución de la carga de cuidado hacia toda la sociedad y no solamente recayéndola en las mujeres. Siguiente diapositiva. Y ahí tenemos la última en la que yo mostraba cómo a través de la nueva ley de reforma de la seguridad social hemos incorporado 2 artículos que le dejan a Uruguay a futuro el desafío de poder pensar cómo hace sostenible su sistema de cuidados. Muchísimas gracias a todos nuevamente.
Muchas gracias, Florencia. Thank you very much for your presentation and for sticking to the time. It's quite impressive to see the comprehensiveness of the system, as well as the attention to also future-proofing, as you mentioned, studies being made to understand better what are the likely impact in the medium and long term, and the requirement in terms of resources. Thank you so much. So we will go now from Latin America to Europe and Central Asia and the Caucasus, more specifically Armenia, where Armenoui Ovakimian from UNICEF will talk to us about the type of reform and the type of interaction we can see between social protection and inclusive care and support. Armenoui, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Hello, colleagues. First of all, thank you for the opportunity to present, and I'm really delighted to be able to share Armenia's example. Of course, effective care and support systems are leading to human capital development, equal participation. They foster equality, equity, provide dignified and autonomous and independent living. I'm not going to repeat some of the great ideas that we already heard about the multidimensionality of care and support, life cycle approach, and also multisectorality. And you will see some of these points trickle down into my presentation and the next slides. I will just say that care and support are indispensable parts of social protection, with interlinkages, of course, to other sectors. You will see, if we can just move to the next slide, just a few points on Armenia. Armenia has a very relatively well-developed social protection system. It's an upper middle income country. You can see some of the statistics, just a few notes. You will see the overall poverty rate. So every fourth Armenian lives in poverty and every third child in Armenia lives in poverty. While we also experience multidimensional poverty, and also a child born today will realize only 58% of its potential when they grew up as an adult. So we have a bit of context when it comes to Armenia. Also, just to mention that in 2019, World Bank together with UNICEF did a core diagnostic of the social protection system. And the system is relatively well developed in terms of the legal framework, policy framework, and also the variety of programs offered. However, it also found out that the coverage of most of the care programs and services is limited, both in terms of the number of beneficiaries reached, the diversity of support provided, but also the geographical coverage. And most of the programs are actually about financial support, so close to 80% are pensions, while the rest is only spent on services, active labor market programs, and other types of benefits. So the government of Armenia has put in place a very ambitious agenda with multiple reforms in different areas, from disability to family-friendly policies to deinstitutionalizations and others that in one way or another touch upon the inclusive care and support agenda. So I will have 3 examples from Armenia. If you can move to the next slide. So in terms of support and care for persons and children with disabilities, since 2010, after ratifying the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, Armenia has made a huge effort to shift from the medical model to a human rights-based approach to disability assessment. So have functionality at the heart of disability assessment with linkages to other sectors, including health, education, and social protection. Early identification and early intervention has been strengthened, and also the diversification of different programs, services, and support modalities has been expanded. So you will see that disability pensions and benefits are in place in Armenia. They are gradually being linked to poverty levels and also increased from year to year. Since 2021, we saw really quite substantive increases when it comes to disability benefits, diversified by the level of disability, and now, as of a few years ago, by the level of functionality. We also have expanded and diversified, updated the National Assistive Technologies list together with the government and other UN agencies, but this is a work in progress. Now assistive technologies are being provided based on vouchers. Also, care and social and rehabilitation services have been expanded through certificate provision. And one service that I would really like to underline is the personal assistance service, which was piloted last year. And based on the lessons learned, now expanded in 2024 as a service for a number of disability types and levels, and also for children of 15 to 18 with moderate disability. And there's an hourly wage for personal assistance, and this program is being now further tested and expanded by the government. The government now is also shifting towards voucher-based support, but in order to do this, together with our ministry counterparts, but also many experts and colleagues across UNICEF and other entities, we are trying to assess the extra cost of disability and also the user experience of persons and children with disabilities to be able to provide targeted support for various types of disability and various high and low intensity type of needs, so that we can increase the quality of life and restore the independent living for persons with disabilities. You can see that the reform ties also with other sectors, especially around inclusive education, healthcare, culture, and sport and employment. One point that I really want to make here is that changes in one sector, for example, social protection, trigger discussions in other sectors. So for example, when introducing the personal assistance service, there has been a dialogue with the Ministry of Education of where the road and where the functions of the personal assistance start and end in school versus the teacher's assistants, who is more responsible for organizing education for children with special educational needs. And this dialogue is ongoing. So where are the lines for education care within the school setting as well? Another example, if you can move to the next slide, please. It's about family-friendly policies and balancing of work and family life for parents and caregivers, and reducing the unpaid care of work. A number of policies have been introduced in Armenia. Again, I want to start by quite a robust financial support, but you can also see that it mostly benefits children of younger age. As of 2023, all children under the age of 2 receive universal monthly childcare benefits. This was not the case because a few years ago it was only for working mothers. Then it was expanded to non-working mothers in rural areas, but also considering the informality rate in Armenia and also more pro-child policies, this was also expanded universally. We have also universal childbirth grants. And the new benefit was introduced for larger families, for families that have 3 and more children, and they also receive support until the child turns 6 years old. One important aspect is the parental leave. So it's both for mothers and fathers. Either of them can take it until the child is 3. And the workplace, if a person was employed in the formal sector, is kept until the child turns 3. However, when looking at various assessments, mostly mothers were benefiting from this parental leave. And here come some of the gender stereotypes. And after some lobbying and support from organizations with the ministry and trying to encourage fathers to take more paid leave and have a better participation in the upbringing of their children, paternity leave, paid paternity leave was adopted. It's only 5 days, but it's a start, hopefully, and this can start changing. And now we hear more and more fathers taking paternity leave in this regard, but there's still some work to be done. Also, last year we had labor code amendments that introduced shortened work hours for mothers who care for children under the age of 2, and also there were breastfeeding breaks every 3 hours for mothers, again with children under the age of 2. And this was also coupled with changes in other sectors, for example, expansion of preschool education services, especially in rural and remote areas. And here also, together with UNICEF, the government has been looking at alternative ways of early childhood education, cheaper versions, and also more affordable for rural communities. And this is now a work in progress. One last point on this slide, very often, unfortunately, family-friendly policy considerations are driven by demographic considerations. And this was the case initially for Armenia. But the new population strategy in its draft form, 2024-2040, tries to shift this paradigm towards more family-friendly policy orientation, the need for care, support, and other systems, rather than putting demographic considerations. And then the final slide, if I may. I wanted to talk about a different type of care arrangements from the child protection perspective and the right to live in a family environment. So again, since 2010, 2012, Armenia has been and at a steady pace of deinstitutionalization, and various models of alternative care and options were put in place, including kinship care, foster care, adoption, family reunification services. Also, gatekeeping mechanisms were strengthened. We also tried small group homes as a last resort. However, this needs to be still elaborated. One thing that I would want to say, that despite multiple emergencies that Armenia has faced throughout the years, also political changes and issues, the decrease in the number of children in institutional care has been steady. You will see that if in 2015 we had 4,500 people, now children, now it's 965, and it's mostly children with the severe disabilities that are left as a last mile in the institutionalization efforts. A success story for Armenia is the investment in foster care. If in 2012 we had 25 foster families, now we have 155, including 155 children in foster care, including 9 children with disabilities in specialized foster care. The government has doubled. Yes?
I really apologize, but you really need to finish now.
I'm finishing. I have only two sentences.
Thank you.
So the government has doubled the funding for foster care. It's providing financial assistance and increased financial assistance for those caring for children with disabilities. And now it's investing more in emergency foster care. Just to summarize, these are some of the examples, not the only ones. There are some political considerations, very often budgetary considerations, opportunities and constraints when we talk about care and support systems. We are at a steady pace of reforms, and some of them are set to continue and hopefully improve as they go and as years pass. Thank you very much, and sorry for taking more time if I did.
Thank you very much, Amenui, for articulating those reforms, and congratulations on foster care. We know that it is a challenge with regards to children with disabilities, and it's great to see progress. So moving from Armenia, we will go all the way in sub-Saharan Africa and in Rwanda. We will discuss first with, okay, I thought we were going to Rwanda. Michael, I think we are still with Vincent before we are going to you. Just my mistake. I apologize. Yeah, so Vincent Gahamani from UNICEF to give us a little insight on a work that has been done with private sector with regards to fostering care and support. Vincent, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Alex. And thank you so much for all the presenters who have presented before me. I will take this opportunity to share with you the experience of Rwanda and the journey the social protection program in Rwanda has moved. The first social protection program in Rwanda was initiated in 2008. And this was the VUP, the Vision 2020 Murenge program. But when this program was introduced, it was really very small. It had only 3 components, but now the social protection sector has immensely grown with lots of interventions ranging from different safety net programs, sustainable livelihood programs that foster graduation, in this case, cash plus interventions, and even some shock responsive interventions. But I will focus more on the aspect of social protection and the inclusive care, which in fact started some years back. As I told you, the first program started in 2008, but after 3 years, the government had to do an impact evaluation of the program. And what was discovered in that impact evaluation was that female-headed households were not moving out of poverty at the same rate as male-headed households. So that remained a puzzle until like 2 years later, when the government commissioned the gender equity study of the VUP program. And what was discovered from that gender equity study was that the VUP program was not gender sensitive and child sensitive, in the sense that it was realized that most of the labor constrained public works households were not participating. They were self-excluding themselves from work, mainly because of caring responsibilities for children and persons with disabilities. So from there, UNICEF had to come in and supported the government to develop the gender and child sensitive social protection options paper to look for the alternatives of ensuring that gender and child care is ensured. And in this paper, there were 6 options that were developed, but the government and UNICEF, by that time, I think that was 2016, they agreed to expand slowly or to introduce these options slowly. And they agreed to start with what is called the expanded public works and the child care aspect. The expanded public works was another option of public works that is that focuses on implementing lighter jobs and flexible public works with flexible working hours, and even with few hours of work compared to the existing public works that was being implemented. And this was meant to target households that are labor constrained, but having or caring for children and persons with disabilities, so that they can also be included in public works. So yeah, after that decision, UNICEF went ahead to pilot these two options, expanded public works and child care services. But this pilot, UNICEF had to combine it with the nutrition component. So it was a component of expanded public works, the mobile creche in terms of child care service, but also linking it with nutrition services. This was piloted in 2 sectors, in 2 districts, and it was later discovered that the combination of all these 3 were yielding a lot of good results, because the expanded public works was employing mainly women. You know, already Lauren had mentioned this, that mainly most of the caregivers are women, and expanded public works through was dominated or is dominated by women. And they were not only doing work maybe on road maintenance, but also the expanded public works beneficiaries were also serving as child care givers. And then those child care givers are paid on public works activity, so they are regarded as public works beneficiaries, though they provide care in they provided care in the mobile creche. But this mobile creche was really a center for different services, because there was a component of growth monitoring, micronutrient powder, and cooking demonstration. So it became a center for different services because of easy accessibility to children where they were, and because we already had, or there is the community health workers who support on health related aspects, so they found it easy for them to provide different services to children while they were in a creche, in a mobile creche. But
Vincent?
also this.
Vincent, I apologize. Like for the other speakers, I will ask you to conclude now, because otherwise our 2 last speakers will not have a chance to share their insights. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I will simply conclude by saying that this pilot incited the government to expand the program. Since then, from then, it has been scaled up to 307 sectors, and the mobile creche was changed into home-based child care, and this has also been expanded to 307 sectors now, and these ECD services or home-based services are attended by over 82,000 children, but the government has expanded to other programs since 2022. They have considered old age grant, disability grant, child grant. All these have been approved by the government since 2022, though most of them have not yet started, but the old age grant will be starting in this coming financial year. So maybe that's, in the interest of time, that's what I would say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vincent. And without any further ado, I would actually use this example you shared about Rwanda to go to Michael. ILO has been working on the use of public works employment programs to support the development of the care workforce and care economy, with a great work on South Africa, which Michael will share. Michael, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And also good day to everyone from my side. So yes,
Michael, we do not hear you.
You do not hear me?
At least I don't.
Oh, hello? Can you hear me now?
Okay. Please, Michael, go on.
Okay, I'll continue, but I'll put on a mic as well, just in case it hopefully that helps. So I'm going to talk about the experience in South Africa with public employment programs and the care economy. This is based on a paper that was shared in the chat already. It tries to capture about 20 years of experience. So I'm going to condense this into 7 minutes if I can. I'll also talk a little bit about, when I say we, this is a government program, but I was at the time when this program started, I was actually working as an official in the South African government. When I say we, it also partially refers to my own experience at the time when we were starting to get this work off the ground. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So yeah, okay, thank you. So I think it's important here to recognize how this program started and where this came from. I mean, the driving force of what is also expanded public works program in South Africa at the time was to create jobs. And there was a large assessment to see where are the areas and the sectors where government can drive job creation. And the care economy was identified at the time. This was in 2003, 2004, as an area where there's major opportunities because there was a lot of unpaid work happening. This was at the height of the AIDS, HIV pandemic in South Africa. So there was a lot of home and community-based care happening, very volunteer-driven or very community-based driven. There's a lot of early childhood development programs as well, also often volunteer or community-driven. And this was seen as opportunity to shift really this widespread unpaid work into paid work, and in the process really create jobs. So this was really the lens. So it was not a lens of integrated care systems or some of what everybody else has been talking about. But as you will see in the transition and over the 20 years, these things all, of course, raised their head, and the program evolved to also, align itself with the social protection policies, etc. But essentially, so these were the characteristics. I think I mentioned those as well. Care services were provided a little bit by public, but a lot by private, informal providers, volunteers. It was even then, and actually continues to be predominantly women. I mean, you see the numbers here. So these are basically what we call full-time equivalents. So these are the number of people or equivalent jobs created. So if you see in home and community-based care over this period, it was about 145,000 people working through the program in the home and community-based care, about 60,000 early childhood development, and about 47,000 in National School Nutrition Program. These were the main programs. The other ones I won't talk about much. These are still mostly 80%, 85% women employment. This has remained fairly constant over time. So this is one of the challenges. Next slide, please. So what have some of the contributions been of using a public employment program or a public works program, some call it, in this sector? I mean, I think on the one, it's been a mixed experience. On the one hand, it has created kind of a new floor in terms of both wages and conditions that, what was a completely informal volunteer sector has some payment, has a minimum wage, not always adhered to, but it is there. So it has helped shift that. There's also increased the pool of skilled workers. There's been a lot of investment in the government in creating learning programs, accredited training, etc., in these sectors, so that the women who are working in these sectors, volunteers, have access to training and can become, recognized caregivers. And it has also driven a significant scale up by actually, and the discourse has probably shifted over the 20 years, but at the time, this job creation narrative was actually quite successful in terms of mobilizing support and resources in terms of and channeling that into the care sector. Say, well, what we want to do is create jobs, and the care sector provides an opportunity. And so we saw a lot of expansion of the programs, all of these over the various phases of EWP. The EWP works over 5-year phases. We're now in the 4th phase, which is 20 years. Can I go to the next slide, please? But of course, the story is, it's always nuanced, right? So, and I think, and this paper was actually done to reflect on that 20-year experience. I think it's part of work we do to see how public works and public employment programs can function and in the care economy, what strengths they have, what weaknesses they have. And we've done this also for a few other countries. For Argentina, we're busy now with Uzbekistan, and actually, just quickly, I invite anybody here who knows of such programs to get in touch, that we'd be interested in documenting these experiences as widely as possible. So on the one hand, it was really a good mechanism for expanding the workforce in the care economy. It introduced a whole set of wages, work conditions, etc., that were not there. It has persisted, on the other hand, being mostly female-driven, and it has, even though minimum wage is in place, the compliance has remained problematic, and this partially also links to the funding model of some of the work. For instance, in the ECD sector, funding is based on a per-child subsidy, and but it doesn't really factor in properly the kind of minimum wage that was introduced, and so you have a funding gap, and these small community-based organizations have to find a way to bridge the funding gap, and often it is through paying below the minimum wage. There has been attempts, but it is, it's still very informal sector driven in many sectors, and this has, remained the problem. It has improved, but it is still very much so. But there have been differences in the health sector. I think the progress better. It has led to this kind of community health workers, for example, which have been much more recognized. Some provinces in South Africa have formalized these, have created jobs in the public sector for community health workers, and now, workers who were informally employed and volunteered some have been able to progress and now are formally employed as community health workers to provinces. But that has not been happened across provinces. This has been a few isolated provinces. And yet at the same time, the problems of under-delivery of care and unemployment and underemployment persist. So there is really an opportunity to drive this forward. Last slide, please, if you could just quickly shift. May I leave you with 4 messages then, that I think on the one hand, you can see that the public employment programs has been important from transitioning this work in volunteers into paid work and introducing some standards. But compliance and the standards, because of informality and lack of funding, have remained problematic. This has to be, this is ongoing work. Hopefully it will shift, but it is a limited process. I think there's another learning. And finally, because of what I mentioned, that there's still under delivery of care and demand for work, experimentation continues. I think a few years ago, the South African government also parallel introduced the presidential employment stimulus, which is also a public works program, but also goes in other care sectors and applies some of the lessons from EWP there. For example, the funding model is very much more aligned to the minimum wage in these programs, and so many of the workers there actually, workers there are actually paid the official government minimum wage. And they didn't have to make this transition from unpaid to formal, but actually were hired from day one on formal basis. There's a lot more there to share, but I think I'm run out of time, so I'm going to pass it back to Alex.
Thank you so much, Michael, for this crisp, synthetic presentation. And listening to you and Vincent, I think we need a dedicated session just on public employment program and care, and how does it relate for different groups, for childcare, home-based care, disability. That would be super interesting. So we need to continue this conversation indeed. Without any further ado, I really would like to now invite Afra Al-Ahmadi from the World Bank to tell us a little bit about the role and the engagement with different stakeholders in this diversity of context, to take us a little bit towards the end of this webinar. Afra, the floor is yours.
So much, Alex. It's a bit challenging in the time remaining, but I can give it a try. Very pleased to be part of this conversation. And basically what I wanted to do is go through a quick overview of the landscape of stakeholders that play a role in this very important agenda, and then share some reflections reflections and considerations when we try to contextualize sort of that landscape of stakeholders. As the demand for the quality and affordable care and support system or services grow, stakeholders' landscape also expands with that. And it could include a range of multiple stakeholders from government. Each could play and would play a role within their mandate, as well as the comparative advantage, where governments could have a role to play in formulating policies, allocating budgets, developing infrastructure and standards, and ensuring coordination, of course, quality assurance as well. Private sector could also play, or can, and it does in some contexts, play an important role in delivering services within the standards and regulations set by the government, but also plays an important role in the financing, mostly through social insurance schemes. International organizations and donor agencies also play an important role in bringing expertise and supporting evidence building and financing. We often see NGOs, civil society, play an important role also in filling the service gaps and advocating for inclusive and affordable. And we've seen, I think, in some of the discussions, as well as a role in monitoring the delivery and the quality, but also there are a role for community organizations, of course, families and the care workers themselves, as well as the academia. Now, a wide landscape like this, the level of functionality and comprehensiveness in terms of the roles, of course, is very context specific. When we zoom into the context of low income and lower middle income countries, there are several considerations I think very important to keep in mind. First, to acknowledge that the performance of these stakeholders is very dependent on financial resources in the specific context, which affects the prioritization of the agenda. A lot of governments struggle with scarce resources and what to prioritize in a context as a wide range of needs for services. But also it depends on the market formality. Market formality determines the role that private sector could play. But also institutional capacity and the maturity and the level of maturity of systems in a country plays a major role on how sort of the roles are played within the public and civil society organizations and the private sector. So these factors influence how different stakeholders perform, how they connect and coordinate, and therefore they impact the pathways for developing an effective system. The context of low and lower middle income countries also often is faced by many challenges to establish systems from the ground up because of the level of maturity of systems in these contexts. And this often opens a space for NGOs and international aid organizations to step in and bridge the service gap. This is very important, it's necessary, but I would say it's very critical that these organizations engage with public institutions and work within a vision on building national capacities. And we've seen in previous conversation the importance of placing care within a national system so that could ensure sustainability of the system. The successful development of the care system also hinges significantly on collaboration, operational coordination, and therefore the importance of linking it with a vision and an agreed upon roadmap to support this from the different stakeholders through that vision for a system approach. Collaboration, however, operationally speaking, would need tools to support it. And among these tools would be data, as well as development of information systems. And we've seen this a lot in some countries within like social registries, management information systems that could enable exchange of data around providers, but also families and individuals who are in need of these services. It is also imperative to acknowledge that in this context of low and lower middle income countries, family members will continue to bear the burden of care, and this trend is likely to persist for some time for many countries, and that really necessitate maximizing efforts to explore solutions that provide also the direct support to families. And we've seen very good examples in the previous presentations. And in many of these contexts, leveraging social safety net and social protection systems, as we have seen also in the presentations, is very critical and provides a great entry points for start building blocks for the care system. And then alongside emphasizing, I think the government, of course, is the lead and is the care bearer for this agenda. And it's very important to elevate this agenda with the governments, and that takes also a role for international agencies involved with governments in policy dialogue to emphasize the importance of this agenda. And it's very critical to bring in the emphasis in addition to the human rights perspective, but also to bring in the economic and developmental impact of the care agenda. And this could be supported by bringing evidence and showcasing how the attention to this agenda contribute also to the labor force participation, to the human capital accumulation, and so on. And finally, I would say that aid agencies also could play an important role in supporting that dialogue by facilitating South-to-South learning. We've seen in the presentations, there are good examples, there are evidence out there, and it's important to facilitate that cross-learning and also maximize on the evidence so that the case is made strong for this agenda. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much indeed, Afra, and to all of our really wonderful speakers today. Thank you so much for joining us and giving us your insights. And I hope what this has left everyone with is a sense that this is doable, and there are lots of different ways to do it, and what we need to kind of get a better understanding and fully realizing the opportunities in care and support is to innovate in these different contexts, try things, see what works, and use this basis, and hopefully as a bit of an inspiration as well, to keep kind of taking a positive approach, finding the right entry points in different contexts, and keep pushing until it works. And I know we talk a lot about in social protection sometimes about Christmas trees and trying to add on all these different elements to our programs and systems, but again, I hope that that what you will take away from this is a really kind of core pillar of all the kind of work that we do. It's if I may, it's more the trunk of the tree than any of the decorations that we're putting on the outside. So we've already run over, so I will keep very short and just again thank all our panelists and speakers and sp.org for very kindly hosting us today. In terms of what's next on this, Lauren mentioned a couple of documents which are already available online, the evidence note on age-sensitive, gender-responsive, disability inclusive systems, and a summary of the outcomes from the workshop that she mentioned that was held in November. There's various work ongoing in the run-up to the next Disability Summit, which I'm sure many of you will be interested in and involved in. But for now, I think apologies for not having a proper Q&A session, but hopefully you've got the answers you need. And many thanks indeed for joining us. Please fill in the survey and look out for any recordings and documents that will be circulating after this. Many thanks indeed. See you all soon. Goodbye.
Gracias. Muchas gracias a todos y a todas.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Muchas gracias. Thank you very much.